Hello. This talk is based on Nagarjuna, who established the Madhyamika school of Buddhism, and that's around about the 2nd century. For my details, Google my blog under Buddhist Non-Duality, Melbourne, Middle Way, Nagarjuna. Today's talk is called Nirvana, which is taken from the book that I compiled, A Whole New Way of Perceiving the World, which is the blog. So we'll just get into it. There may be no single concept in Buddhism which has elicited more confusion and debate than nirvana. Nirvana is often translated as freedom, but it actually means extinction. A literal translation of nirvana is blown out, as in the extinguishing of a fire or blowing out of false thoughts and their concomitant desires. Nirvana is not a state of transcendent eternal bliss, like that of some forms of yoga in Hinduism, nor sanctified salvation, like in Christianity. It is simply the clarity and peace that arises when the objects we have been grasping onto are realized to be empty. The Buddha eliminates various misconceptions about the state of nirvana. Nirvana is not something that can be attained and not something that arises. It is also not something that is permanent, and it is not something that can be possessed or relinquished. It can only be described in terms of a negation of all our assumptions and conceptual elaborations about it. Nirvana is not a thing. The fact that nirvana is spoken of as being realized, attained, or achieved is not to be understood as implying that freedom is a thing which can be known or possessed. It is simply used as a tool for escaping suffering. The only way of reaching nirvana, the goal, is to realize that in the ultimate sense, there is no goal to be reached. One substantialist notion was that the bound person partakes of the quality of bondage. Nirvana then would be the relinquishment of this nature and the adoption of a new and wholly disparate mode of existence, the freed state. This does not apply. There is not a person who partakes of qualities, and freedom is not a concrete goal that can be striven for. An eternalist would hold that the state of nirvana transcends temporality, and the one who achieves freedom also becomes eternal. Nirvana is not such, for it avoids the extremes of both eternalism, permanence, and transience, impermanence. It cannot be thought of in terms of arising and ceasing. It is not a thing that is obtainable, not a transcendent reality or a universal consciousness. Another way of perceiving nirvana is as follows. The very same world is samsara or nirvana, dependent upon one's perspective or attitude, for all else remains as it was. When one perceives the constant arising and ceasing of phenomena, one perceives samsara. When all reification is abandoned, that very same world and one's mode of living in it becomes nirvana. What this is saying then is that samsara has no thing that distinguishes it from nirvana. Nirvana has no thing that distinguishes it from samsara. That nirvana and samsara are perceived separate is made by the false supposition that they are two self-existing things. Pretty radical. To say that the world of suffering, samsara, is equivalent to the highest and most honoured goals of Buddhism, nirvana, would seem to be flagrant blasphemy. It is only blasphemy from the standpoint of essentialism. If there is a self-nature in either samsara or nirvana, then the two would assuredly be different. Bondage as a real thing would have to be broken free of, and enlightenment as a true state would have to be achieved. The tendency to see them as concrete things actually would deny a person the possibility of ever releasing one and obtaining the other. If the samsaric process was real, having self-nature, where are we up to? If the samsaric process was real, having self-nature, and if one were bound within that process, then one could never leave. Similarly, if nirvana were a real attribute of which the unenlightened individual were not yet partaking, and if it had an essence, then it could never be achieved. Such a radical separation of nirvana and samsara severs any possible relationship between them. If this happens, then something bound can never become unbound. And someone who suffers can never hope for release. It is only because both nirvana and samsara, like all other phenomena, are empty of inherent nature that they can be said to be the same. As empty, they can each be said to lack self-nature and are the same in that neither is real. Inasmuch as nirvana is dependent upon the conception of samsara and dependent upon an illusory entity, nirvana also belongs to the realm of apparent truth. Nirvana is none other than the non-establishment of anything in its intrinsic being. When entities are analysed with wisdom, they are found to be like an illusory elephant in a magical show, non-existent in its intrinsic being. Since everything is empty, then nirvana is just as empty as samsara, and there is no real difference between them. Hence, all phenomena are similar to nirvana, because all phenomena are devoid of intrinsic nature. The pragmatic value of equating nirvana and the cycle of birth and death is that it demonstrates the attainability of enlightenment. Freedom and bondage are not identifiable things with separate and distinct spheres of influence. To borrow a simplistic view of theism, if the world comprised one plane and freedom another, then the feasibility of escaping one and attaining the other would be highly suspect. The Buddha's declaration that freedom is the world and the world is freedom demonstrates that enlightenment is readily at hand. One need do no more than shift one's perception to find it. Seen from the unenlightened point, the cosmos is a cycle of birth and death characterized by suffering. Seen from the vantage point of dependent origination and emptiness, the cosmos is an ever-flowing, ever-changing, empty process. The highest awareness which is needed for release from samsara, then, is not the result of moving from the finite to the infinite, but the release from ignorance about the dependent origination of anything at all. Dependently originated things, which include all existent things, includes nirvana and samsara, are empty of self-nature, independent nature, because they depend on other things. Nirvana depends on samsara, samsara depends on nirvana. And they both depend on an entity who's experiencing samsara or nirvana. Nirvana, then, is living in full awareness of dependent origination, full awareness of the empty nature of things. The achievement of nirvana requires dependence, impermanence, and the possibility of change, all of which are grounded in emptiness. The point is that no ascription of any predicate to nirvana can be literally true, for such a predication would purport to be an assertion that nirvana is an ultimately existent phenomena with a determinate property, and there are no ultimately existent phenomena, neither samsara nor nirvana. Because nirvana can only be spoken of by contrasting it in some sense with samsara, and because there is no conventionally existent perceptible entity that could serve as a referent for the term, there is the terrible temptation when speaking of nirvana to think it is an inherently existing thing or state and highly desirable, since it is indeed characterized as liberation from suffering. Nirvana does not exclude samsara. We don't escape from samsara in order to obtain nirvana, because nirvana is not someplace else. Nirvana is a way of being here. The jewel seal in hand, a certain ancient sutra, says, to like nirvana and to dislike the world makes jewel. If one does not like nirvana nor loathe the world, then there is no duality, no distinguishing one thing from another. Why is this so? Because if there is bondage, then there is liberation. If from the beginning there is no such thing as bondage, who would ever seek for liberation? He or she who realizes that there is no bondage and no liberation will have no likes or dislikes. This is entering the Dharma gate of non-duality.